Welcome to the first episode of Delta Defiance, the Deep South anti-fascist podcast of the airwaves. My name is Mike Parker, and I'm here with my colleagues. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Jen Hayden.
Hi, I'm Tony Miller.
And this project grew out of a more traditional book club with the theme of anti-fascism. And over the course of the months that we were reading the books that were part of that book club, and of course paying close attention to what was happening in our country, in our state, in our community over the course of that time, we decided that we basically wanted to take it to another level even after that book club ended its run. So we decided to try to launch this. We're glad to have you along for it. This is the very first one. It'll probably be a little rough around the edges, but we are committed to it, and we are committed to the anti-fascist mission that is reflected by it. Mm-hmm. So in this first episode, we are going to discuss Clint Smith's book, How the World Is Past. Clint Smith is a very accomplished poet, and this was his first nonfiction book. The subtitle is A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America. To give you a little background on the author, Clint Smith was born August 25th, 1988 in New Orleans, Louisiana. He attended Ben Franklin High School up until the point that his senior year of high school was disrupted by Hurricane Katrina, at which point his family relocated to Houston, and he attended the AWTY, A-W-T-Y International School. He followed that by getting his BA from Davidson College and a PhD from Harvard in education. He was part of the winning team at the National Poetry Slam in 2014. He also serves as a staff writer for The Atlantic. He taught high school English in Prince George's County in Maryland and was actually named the Christina Sarbanes Teacher of the Year by the Maryland Humanities Council. And this book, How the Word Is Past, was published in 2021. And among other honors, it has won the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award for nonfiction. It was named one of the New York Times 10 Best Books of 2021 and one of Time Magazine's 10 Best Nonfiction Books of 2021. Mm-hmm. So the basic format of the book is that he goes to different places that are significant in the history of race and of slavery in the United States, as well as Senegal. He starts close to the community in which he grew up in, which was New Orleans, mm-hmm. and kind of works outward from that. And I would assume that was intentional on his part to kind of bring it from someplace that is very intimate and very personal to him, as well as highly significant in terms of the issues that he is dealing with, mm-hmm. and then move outward to these other historical sites that deal with the Civil War and its aftermath, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, into the era of mass incarcerations. The first chapter deals with Monticello, the home of Thomas Jefferson, the third president, certainly a very accomplished individual in terms of architecture, mm-hmm. science, political philosophy. I mean, even theology. When you look at the Jefferson Bible, I mean, just in so many ways, just a exemplar of the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. But of course, there are some. There are other sides to Jefferson.
Yes.
For us, it certainly wasn't necessary for Clint Smith to point out that Jefferson was a slaveholder, and that, of course, there's the situation with Sally Hemings, mm-hmm. where she bore several of his children. Mm-hmm. What are some impressions y'all took away of specifically Clint Smith's approach to Jefferson's life and legacy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first thing that really interested me in the book in the beginning was what you had mentioned, Mike, like how he got started. He was definitely from New Orleans. One thing I don't know if you mentioned is that we are actually in the New Orleans metro. We're in New Orleans ourselves. I think the thing that really got him kind of started and interested was the Take 'em Down movement. There's these monuments all over. I mean, it's just like, you know, like the history of our city is a daily part of our lives, right? So the Take 'em Down movement is what actually got him interested in kind of learning more. Overall, I would say that this book is about kind of like gaps and better understanding what our gaps are in knowledge, how other people try to like close different kinds of gaps and how they do that differently. So with regard to Monticello, one of the big things that was important to your point was Jefferson is a symbol of like American ideals, like a symbol of liberty, you know, and he was talking about the documents that were actually written on top of that hill, and yet, you know, home to hundreds of enslaved people, right? But we know so much about him. There's so much written about him, but we have very little that's actually available to us around all of those people that lived there, you know, worked there, spent their lives there, you know, helped him to enjoy the life and the freedom that he had to be able to write all of these things. I mean, that was on the backs of enslaved people. So that was part of what I was thinking and honing in on this part of the book. That there is this kind of duality between Jefferson as this symbol of America and liberty, and at the same time, you know, just these hundreds of enslaved people who were like living in the brutality of slavery with beatings, families being separated and destroyed, people being auctioned off, you know, 100 people auctioned off after his death. So that was the kind of thing that I got out of it. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, what do we do with memory? When we think of Jefferson, we're looking past a lot of the ugly spots. We're looking at his legacy in terms of being a founding father. We're then looking at our city. I speak from someone who's adopted the city, living here for 5 years. And I was struck by Clint Smith's comment, the city is a memorial to slavery, which means a memorial to bondage, a memorial to authoritarian government, which I think brings us to the present day. When we talk about people can be disappeared, that's also part of the legacy of Jefferson, because the people who he kept as enslaved persons, they were disappeared from their families in West Africa, in the Senegambia region. They were disappeared, and then their families could be sold away, and they could be disappeared. When we look at how that applies today, we see that immigrants can be disappeared. We see that people legally here can be disappeared. We even see that citizens who just happen to be students with a different political bent can be disappeared. And here we are in defiance of it all. So I think that when we talk about what the legacy of someone means, it's how we tell that history. And it's important that we see, as you both mentioned, the two sides.
Mm-hmm. And I think historically and in the current moment, I believe we definitely see the fascist forces, the fascist parties, the fascist individuals recognizing the importance of how history is told, how that narrative is controlled, and we're seeing that. I think most recently, Tony, this may be something you take personally, given your experience about the Naval Academy having, I want to say it was like about 300 volumes that were pulled from the library. Many of them specifically having to do with race, with the legacy of slavery, books by Maya Angelou.
Yeah. Why the Caged Bird Sings.
Right. It is, which is very much a radical book in terms of the story being told, but it's also become like a iconic American memoir.
So my friend who I served on deployment with. I haven't spoken to her about broadcasting her name, so I will just call her Brenda. So Brenda can check out Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, but she cannot check out Maya Angelou's Why the Caged Bird Sings. There's a lecturer on Stoicism who was just denied the right to teach his course at the U.S. Naval Academy for the third year he would be doing this, because he wanted to bring up why living an ethical life has applications to what has been done by this authoritarian government. And so by pointing out the cover-up, I think we can better understand how we can defy this authoritarian government.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely part of the book. That was interesting. It's really about the reckoning and how we remember, or how we choose to remember the history of slavery, right? And I think that how we choose to remember and how we remember is such an important part of not doing this all over again, right? And you can see the steps that are being taken to make us forget, to control the narrative. And it's really, really important that we do fight against that as much as we can.
So Clint Smith visits Monticello himself, and he interacts with others who are there as tourists. I mean, we're not talking an amusement park or someplace that people just will kind of casually go to on their summer vacation. This is obviously a destination for people who tend to have an interest in history and probably think of themselves as engaged citizens. Did you think that the way that Smith describes the experience at Monticello reflected a desire on the part of the staff of the institution to tell the story accurately?
Mm-hmm.
There seemed to be a renewed approach to telling the story of the Hemmings family and preserving that history so it is not lost, to understand that that is also the genealogical lineage of Jefferson, and that the two halves of the family both have received a type of inheritance from that lineage. So that is, I think, a success story in preserving our history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that I did feel it was interesting. They do kind of have to, from what they were saying, try to navigate that line, because they acknowledge that today there's just this fundamental, basic lack of knowledge about the history of slavery in this country and the treatment of enslaved people, and so I think that they're definitely trying to bridge that gap, and they've been doing this a long time. They themselves speak to the evolution of how that story is being told. They were talking about, over time, the way that they actually portrayed Jefferson's relation to the Hemmings children, and now they're saying like he was the biological father of these kids. So and that took time and it took evolution to get there. I think that something that was interesting was that whole part where we're not really talking about, or there's not as much information about those people. And I think that part of what they're trying to do is they're trying to piece together the stories. They're trying to piece together the information from what they do have available. And a lot of that was actually from Jefferson's accounting in that farmhouse book. When people were auctioned off, who they were that was auctioned. So you get to see the breakup of those families. You get to see sometimes kids, being sold off. I think they had to be at least 11 or something, but they would be auctioned off and separated from their families. And then the fact, I think they mentioned in that part that there was no legal marriage, but people got married, and then those relationships were dissolved because they wouldn't even allow you to get married to the person you love, because how could you have agency to do that? You have no right to be able to make your family. Most of what they have is just very kind of sparse record, but you can see that what they're trying to do is that they're trying to kind of bring that in. And yet you can go to the house tour and not get any. And so I think where they were trying to say is that they try to bring it in a little gently. They're moving in the right direction. They're bringing it a little gently. They're trying not to like overwhelm people who they didn't come here for this. And then they offer opportunity that you don't have to get any of that at all. Right?
Right.
It's a hybrid.
Speaking to what you were saying about the sparseness of the information and what information there is, it strikes me as ironic that the information that is most at hand is that which treats the enslaved peoples as purely economic assets, so that they're for someone like Jefferson, who was obviously a very intelligent man in terms of analytics, in terms of just the scientific reason of the time of the Enlightenment, that his record keeping would be so meticulous that would be the information that would be most apparent would be that of treating them purely as economic assets and dehumanizing them in that way.
I think Germany also, I mean, one of the pieces that has been able to kind of pull this all together is the record keeping around how many people they moved in trains, what were the trains that were moving, like they were extremely good record keepers. So much of this that pieces this together comes, I think, from unexpected places.
And pulling it to today with the administration using commercial apps to avoid the Presidential Records Act, to prevent any future administrations or historians from seeing the crimes that are being committed.
Right.
And yet, someone who was so meticulous as Jefferson, all the evidence is there for history to judge.
Yeah.
So on page 22, Smith says, Jefferson knew that slavery degraded the humanity of those who perpetuated its existence because it necessitated the subjugation of another human being. At the same time, he believed that black people were an inferior class. This is where Jefferson's logic falls apart, historian Winthrop D. Jordan wrote in 1968. If Jefferson truly believed that black people were inferior, then he must have, quote, suspected that the Creator might have in fact created men unequal. And he could not say this without giving his assertion exactly the same logical force as his famous statement to the contrary, unquote. So it just feels like
It's that duality.
that duality that just gets so knotted in these contradictions and these illogical leaps, but it's a knot is hard to unravel, and that I believe is what Smith is doing very effectively in this book, and also calling attention to others who have been doing this work for a long time, which is also commendable. If someone goes to explore the work of A. Winthrop Jordan based on reading about it in this book, then that's certainly a positive as well.
Hey y'all, breaking in to present some readings from the text. This is a reading from pages 48 and 49. Enjoy. So Clint Smith goes to meet Naya Bates, who is Monticello's director of African American history and director of the Oral History Project. And she says in the first 30 years that Monticello was a museum, most of the guides were black men. They were dressed in livery. They were dressed as enslaved people. She turned to her computer. In the sepia-toned photo taken in the 1930s or 40s, two black men stood in front of columns with the entrance open behind them. They each wore three-piece tuxedo suits with 2 rows of buttons ornamenting their outer jackets. They each had a thin bow tie and striped vests underneath. They looked towards the camera with expressions difficult to interpret. Some of them were descendants of people who were enslaved here, Naya said. Sometimes the stories the men told about the plantation had been passed on to them by family members. Naya added that she had zero patience for those, when confronted with that history, contend that Monticello is attempting to tear down Jefferson's legacy. It's telling the full truth of who he was, she said. Yes, he contributed great things. Yes, he gave us the Declaration of Independence and the university where I got my degree. But he also owned people. He owned ancestors of people I know. That's reality. I think in order to really understand him and to fully understand him, you have to grapple with slavery, you have to grapple with physical violence and psychological violence and family separation. We would not be doing the story justice if we don't tell these stories.
So from Monticello, Smith moves on to the Whitney Plantation, which is located about an hour from New Orleans and is unique among the plantations that are open to the public in that it emphasizes the experience of the enslaved people and what their lives were like, what how they resisted in small and oftentimes
Large ways.
significant ways.
Yeah.
And given our project here, we decided to go to Whitney Plantation ourselves to supplement what Smith writes about. Would either of y'all like to speak about just like personal impressions of that trip to the Whitney Plantation?
Sure. The thing that I noticed that carried me from the Monticello chapter to Whitney in our trip was the quote, there's a difference between history and nostalgia. And when you think about the history books that we study in school, you think about a tinge of nostalgia because it's inculcating a certain type of student, one who will be a good citizen. Whereas when you go to an historical site, you're getting a true history if that institution chooses to tell it.
Right.
And the Whitney chooses to tell it without adornment. So I really felt that freed me to be curious because I wasn't asked to ignore all the things that were being left unsaid.
Yeah, that was my experience too. They deliberately and exclusively focus on the enslaved person's experience. And I've, the only other place that I've experienced that was actually in one of the concentration camps in Germany that I was able to travel to when I was junior year abroad. And so I was able to go to one of these concentration camps and to see firsthand what the experience was during the Holocaust of people in those camps. And this was the closest, it wasn't as kind of like stark as that, I have to say, but it was the closest in my experience of these kinds of places. And it definitely reminded me, and having the statues of the children, they bring you some kind of like closeness, especially to the children's experience in these places. They're not just, adults that are, being taken out to the fields. They specifically bring up what the child's role is to carry the harvested cane, very heavy machete type, cutting the cane down. But it was the children all day, every day, hours and hours and hours, pulling the bundles of cane out of the fields. This was their, sun up to sundown life. So, it was very moving. And I don't think I would have gotten all of that had we not actually gone. So I was very appreciative of that.
One of the unique things about the Whitney is not just the restoration of the historical buildings and the artifacts and the commitment to the authenticity, but also the aesthetic choices that they make with their sculptures at different spots and the sculptures of the children, especially, that I would argue contribute a lot to the overall experience of the Whitney, but it's not necessarily something that you expect to see in that type of environment. There's such a commitment to the historical authenticity that It's like it's preserved in amber.
Yeah.
And I was impressed by the horticulture as well that connects the land to our present day, where we visited one of the gardens that was actually tended in part by our tour guide. And it was an example of where little plots could be kept by the enslaved people themselves.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too that we had the opportunity to actually go into a few of the slave cabins that they had pulled forward from where actually the people who worked the fields lived, but they brought these because it was some miles away in the fields. But they brought these cabins forward, so we were able to go see. And it's a double. I mean, it's literally a double. And so a double in New Orleans is you have these kind of two shotgun. They call them shotgun double because you can look through the front door and you can see through the back door, right, straight through.
Clear line of sight.
And the two sides allowed you to share a fireplace in between both sides. And they said that people, the descendants of Whitney Plantation slaves, lived there until 1975. So just think about that.
Right. And our tour guide, who was excellent, pointed out that irony of this architectural style carrying over into the present day to become an iconic New Orleans. The shotgun double style is so iconic to New Orleans. And here's the origin of it. Again, the whole idea of history and nostalgia, because the typical New Orleanian is going to have nothing but warm feelings for just the concept of the shotgun double. It's just it's unique. It kind of forces a certain microcosm of community because there's someone right on the other side of the wall, and yet there could have been 10, 15 people living in that very small space at the Whitney in decidedly unnostalgic conditions.
The connection I make is to the culture of homeownership being essential to the American dream. And yet we're seeing an untold American dream of basic freedom from bondage that I think shows the insidiousness of a slave-holding power, holding the keys to American government. So for white supremacy to be on the rise is threatening a return to that very slave-holding power. And they're not going to stop at people of a darker color this time.
So I was struck by the church, that the origin of the church. So on page 60, Clint Smith says, this church, built by freedmen, was by free people of color, was established after the war and sits off the dirt road. They originally called it the anti-yoke, Y-O-K-E, Baptist Church, a statement against their former bondage and a homonymic tribute to Antioch, the cradle of Christianity. So I was just struck by the inventiveness of the language, how the literalness of the anti-yoke, the yoke as an instrument of bondage, but then that sort of mythological, religious, and it could be argued nostalgic as well. I think, especially in that post-war time after emancipation, despite the obvious limitations that were placed almost immediately afterwards, I think there was still this surge of creativity and joy that contributed to something like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think our guide also said that after the Middle Passage shut down, right after transatlantic slavery was stopped, then you really started having this like in-country breeding. The owner of the Whitney was reading those documents again, right, and ran across the one that said a female described as a good breeder. And she mentioned that the way that they brought them south initially after the Middle Passage was shut down was that they yoked the men,
Yes.
right? And they marched them in rows, 2 by 2. The men were yoked for sure. And so this whole tie to the church, I think, the anti-yoke that becomes Antioch, very, very interesting.
Right. And we, the Middle Passage is often cited for its brutality and how many of those who were brought on it didn't survive it. But then you hear about however many hundreds of miles at least that they would be covering if they were coming from Charleston or Savannah. One of
They
those
walked
ports.
here.
Right.
They would have even walked from further inland in their home nation and been marched by African slavers
That's right.
to the coast.
That's right.
And then they would have been, starting the Middle Passage on the Gold Coast. And then they would have been, yet again, cast, into chains or coffles. And as Jen mentioned, they'd be physically yoked as they endured another march. Mm-hmm. These are, the personification of perseverance.
Right.
I think she mentioned that they were essentially being walked to their deaths because working on the sugarcane plantation, which the Whitney was, it was 7 to 10 years is what she mentioned. So you're literally being walked to your death. They were walking to their deaths and they knew it.
So you made reference to a particularly enslaved young woman being referred to as a good breeder. That is in the book, that is referred to when Smith is speaking to the owner of the Whitney, which is a very interesting journey that he made. John Cummings is his name. And on page 75, Smith says that John grew up in New Orleans and attended Catholic schools from kindergarten through college, graduated from Loyola University of New Orleans with a business and law degree. He became a successful lawyer. I mean, it's just a classic New Orleans archetypal story. You can just imagine him in his seersucker suit. Self-proclaimed liberal, worked alongside black activists, reopened the Audubon Park swimming pool in New Orleans when the city closed it. And Fred had told him that the old Whitney plantation was for sale. Plantation was in bad shape, but John thought he would clean it up and, similar to what had been done with other plantations throughout the South, turn it into a tourist destination. So just a classic trajectory at this point. And then there was a report commissioned by Formosa.
Formosa is a chemical company?
Right, so the land could most likely be exploited even more. And part of the document was the inventory of the enslaved peoples, a name, an age, a column for what they did on the plantation, a dollar amount for every one of them, and including... he said, Cummings says, not at our plantation, but I saw an inventory where the woman was 29. I forget her name. There's a job in the plantation that was good breeder. She was a good breeder, had 9 children in 11 years. That's when I realized that I could not have this property and make it a tourist attraction that would glorify a life of people who exploited human beings. So he was able to make that journey mentally, emotionally, and he was able to have the resources to make the Whitney as it is now a reality.
He was able to tell the story that was recorded by those who couldn't tell their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing I think I remember him saying, and I thought I wrote a note about it, it was his awakening. Reading that material was, and he realized, the whole book I think is like about the gaps again, and he realized what his gaps were.
Right.
And to be very fair, this whole book, this is making me personally realize what my gaps are. And oh my gosh, I mean, wow. So yeah, I guess we come to it when we come to it, but it's a good book to read to help get that curiosity around your own gaps, to continue to learn more. And the library, I mean, I know we need to kind of move on to Angola, but just to the library itself, it was astounding.
There is a gift shop that includes a very impressively curated book collection of the history, also some good fiction and poetry, including some of Clint Smith's books. It's really remarkable. A lot of good history, and I would say sociology and economics about the legacy of slavery as it relates to the regional and national economies. Oh, it's outstanding.
Yeah, you speak about the main artery of that national economy being the Mississippi River. And when we were taking our tour guide pointed, hey, you walk about 10 minutes in that direction and you're going to hit the Mississippi River. And it means that African culture was introduced through this artery as well, because they were the most valuable element of that economy.
Right.
That's right. And then it was interesting, speaking about that like main artery, the Mississippi River, and then the levees, which the enslaved people actually built along that Mississippi River, right? And then when they had the slave revolt, that is where they put the 55 spiked heads was along the Mississippi River. And it wasn't like specifically out of Whitney, but it was in the area of the Whitney Plantation where they had those heads displayed to prevent further slave revolts. And the federal government stepped in the year later to like perpetuate that system of slavery and the institution of slavery in this country. So,
and connecting that to Thomas Jefferson's refusal to see an enslaved person's ability to act out of love, and then to see Charles Deslandes to invoke rebellion as among the most pure acts of selfless love to save a people. I just says all you need to know about a people.
Right. So another figure who emerges in the Whitney Plantation discussion is Dr. Ibrahima Seck, the Senegalese historian and the Whitney's director of research. He is speaking to Clint Smith. This is around page 78, 79, about being selected to participate in an international visitors program. I mean, something that would probably be under fire under this administration. And visiting Mississippi for the first time. He says, we visited Oxford. They brought us to see an old Delta blues singer, James Son Thomas. When he started playing, I just melted. I said to myself, there's something that needs to be investigated here along this river, along the Mississippi River. He said he felt a direct connection to his homeland. Quote, the Delta blues is so close to our musical culture in the Sahara of Africa. He said, when we get closer to the desert, that's where you hear many people singing along with the African banjo. Very sad songs. So, again, you're talking about the river bringing that culture that has already made this journey from another continent and is going to then just go through such an evolution, and I would argue then be turned around to go to the rest of the world to, at different times, be a very substantial anti-fascist force. So I feel like it's going to be a theme we're going to return to over the course of this podcast, is these cultural exchanges that inform the resistance in all these different times and these different places and these different expressions. And I feel we're going to see these seeds of these blooms of hopefulness come out of some of the most difficult, depressing circumstances. I feel like that's something we're going to see over and over again while we do this.
Breaking in again with another reading that begins near the end of chapter 2, around page 82.
When people leave the Whitney, Dr. Seck wants them not only to be able to connect the dots between the intergenerational iterations of violence, but also to understand that the importation of Africans was responsible for both the economic foundation of this country and its culture. Quote, you see children being abused, women being abused, people being mutilated, decapitated, he said in reference to enslavement. But I always tell my visitors that we also need to go beyond all of that. Yes, of course, they did suffer a lot. They built the foundation of the economy of this country. But let's also go beyond all of that and see how they contributed to building the culture that all Americans are enjoying today. And also, outside in the world, the culture is everywhere. And what makes American culture so active abroad, outside, has something to do with the culture that was born here on this plantation, unquote. Well, I need to
Can't have liberation until we've addressed incarceration.
Yeah, that's a very good segue.
Yes, so Clint Smith spends some time at Angola prison. It just is a former plantation that was converted into the Louisiana State Penitentiary. This is from page 95. Land upon which Angola is built had once been the plantation of Isaac Franklin. So it's a very rural area, a cotton plantation. Once the plantation of Isaac Franklin, a man whose business, Franklin and Armfield, became one of the largest slave trading firms in the United States. Plantation produced 3,100 bales of cotton a year, higher yield than most in the South, and that a former major in the Confederate Army, Samuel Lawrence James, purchased the plantation from Franklin's widow and agreed to a 21-year lease with the state to purchase access to all of the state's prisoners as long as he was able to keep all the profits. So the privatization of prisons is certainly not.
It goes way back.
Yes. So, any particular impressions of this chapter?
Well, why don't you go, Tony?
I mean, I just wanted to, draw the connection between Isaac Franklin, plantation owner, turned owner of a convict leasing cabal, and our modern day private prisons or prisons for profit, which are turning the ICE, imprisonments into a boondoggle. We have seen how even other countries' prison systems are getting in the game. So,
Right.
Notorious, prisons are being used to house the deportees. Angola, I thought it was really interesting what Clint Smith was told by his tour guide there, who seemed to be defensive throughout and not wanting to address the uncomfortable parts of Angola's history. The tour guide said, "I can't change what happened here." Okay, but you can tell what did.
Right.
So that's the, big blinking light for me is the history is being lost if you're not telling it.
Angola glosses over the plantation history, essentially erases any kind of foundational link to slavery. I remember them saying in the book that they talked about Native Americans and they essentially skip over the plantation era and move directly into kind of like the prison and so forth. But even today, I mean, one of the things that Clint was talking about was a very recent photograph, and then he also mentioned there is this prison population which is primarily black men, right? And they're in the fields again. They're still in the fields. They have their hoes and they're working the fields, and they have their guards on horses, riding above them. And it just, that link and that connection. And that picture, I think, was one of the pictures that was in or near the gift shop. And do y'all remember the mug that he mentions? That there's this gift shop mug, and on the mug it says, Angola prison. It's a gated community.
You're right.
Right, and it's just like going back to the whole gap issue. They're not even trying to fill the gap. They're just essentially ignoring the link essentially to the plantation. I had no idea Angola prison used to be a plantation. That it was a cotton plantation, and just none. And I've known about the prison because there's a big rodeo. That's the other thing that we didn't talk about, but there is a huge rodeo that happens every year. I don't know what they get for it, but it always seems sketchy to me.
That's a complicated one for sure. I think because it does seem to be something that a lot of the prisoners who take part in it take pride in their commitment to it and to their performance. And my understanding is that a lot of them didn't have any experience with horses, with with cattle before this, but it's just it is an outlet in a life that probably doesn't have very many. I mean, so.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a complicated issue for sure, but they are making money off of it. So I mean, but again, there's so many of these kinds of maybe similar.
There's something gladiatorial.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
In one way, I see an analogy to your choice of experiences at Monticello. You can experience the circus and go to the big house. You can also, experience a more curated tour. But the curated tour, again, leaves a lot to be desired at Angola.
Oh, definitely.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because it's being treated as if, oh, let me show you my gated community.
Yeah. And how much better we've done, right? Because they do talk about how terrible it was, and I'm sure they have made strides, but I mean, anybody who's starting at less than 0 is going to look better doing anything.
Yes, on page 102, Clint Smith says, but simply because something has been reformed does not mean it is now acceptable. And even if something is now better, that does not undo its past, nor does it eliminate the necessity of speaking about how that past may have shaped the present.
And the past includes slave patrols, paddy rollers. It includes, race riots to protest the draft, in which African American men either they were murdered because they were considered for the draft, or they were murdered because they were in their uniforms after they were allowed to serve. And we see that in our state, it took till I believe the 70s to even have a case up in front of the Supreme Court to challenge the use of criminal convictions for less than a unanimous vote of the jury. And even then, they did not completely overturn it. They just, thought it was a little bit, too harsh to, I think, have a conviction based on 6 of 9 jury members. So they said, I think you need to have 7.
Reform.
So it's reform. It's slightly less unusual. Still just as cruel.
Right. So, one of the individuals who Smith talks to is Norris Henderson in Angola, a former prisoner in Angola for almost 30 years that says that he did not commit the crime for which he was incarcerated. Doesn't really go into detail about that, but Henderson has then devoted his time to being an advocate for Angola prisoners. Smith talks about Norris Henderson speaking about in 1991 when the state of Louisiana switched to lethal injection for the execution of death row prisoners. Instead of purchasing a bed, Norris said, the Department of Corrections found it cheaper to direct the prisoners in the machine and welding shops to build it, with each part of the bed assembled separately. Upon realizing when they were building, Norris said, the men refused to continue, and as a result, they were locked inside their cells. The word spread like wildfire because it was lunchtime and they were getting locked up, and so when it came time for everybody to go back to work after lunch, everybody's like, we are not going back to work. So on the one hand, you have the cluelessness of those in power thinking that this was a good idea. On the other hand, you have these prisoners who are in a position where any kind of resistance that they engage in can be brutally oppressed, and yet they are still capable and willing to resist in a situation where it's just morally untenable.
Right. Powerful resistance. Definitely some agency to be able to say, you're not going to make us, just not.
Right, and it should be should be said that the administration did respond in a way that they decided that this was not a good idea after this action. But it's inspiring, given where we are now in this historical moment, where it feels like we're in a point where things could really turn toward a full-blown fascist kind of situation. But there obviously is still a lot of room for resistance.
Yep. I thought that one of the inmates described the duality of having no freedom but yet fighting for agency when he said, "A century of forced labor, blood and pain, lives wasted, buried in the shame. Slave masters oversee their daily tasks, hidden behind century-old sadistic masks. The world has passed this deathly land by. The inhabitants still ask why." And so they're asking by putting everything on the line when they refuse to build the instrument of their own destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it should also be pointed out that was published in the Angolite newspaper, which is an award-winning publication published by inmates, published, edited, written by inmates in Angola, and again shows the ability and willingness to resist one's situation, even in the direst of circumstances. We also acknowledge that we're in no way disregarding the those who were victimized by those who are prisoners in Angola.
100.
Which is why I think there should be a disclaimer every time the media reports on something that President Trump decided by executive order. It's like, just because he decided that all immigrants should be deported, that by no means says that we don't have feelings for the victims of that policy. Mm-hmm. But does the media feel the need to say that after everything they report on President Trump? Of course not.
This concludes our discussion of part one of How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. Please join us for the discussion of the second half of this book.